let us begin with the continuation of the Shemoneh Esrei. We're up to the seventh blessing, the blessing of redemption, Geula. Now, the rabbis discuss why this was specifically placed number 7, the blessing for redemption, because we're taught by the rabbis that in the 7th millennium the redemption will start. And therefore they wanted to make sure that this blessing for redemption was number 7, to correspond to the idea that it's in the 7th millennium redemption will start. Even though it won't really be completed until the 8th millennium, but there's a concept of Atchalta de Geula. The beginning of the Geula is really what we focus on, since we're waiting for this moment for over 6,000, 5,700 some odd years. We really been waiting. So as soon as this Geula begins, we start with the 7th. So we're going with the 7th bracha here. Now, if we look back at the preceding brachas, we have over here Geula, redemption. Right before it is forgiveness, and then before that tshuva. So the pattern makes a lot of sense, because once a person does tshuva, so that's step 1 in the process of erasing the negative deeds that he's done, then comes forgiveness. Once God gives full forgiveness and pardoning, so then the slate is completely clean. Now at this point it's appropriate to ask for Geula, because prior to this, it's not necessarily, we're not ready to ask for such a great thing as redemption, because we're guilty of sins, we have things to fix. But now that everything is perfect, so it's the time to ask for Geula, to ask for redemption. With this idea in mind, we could actually, I think, look at the very beginning of the blessing. The beginning of the blessing says, Re'ena ve'onyenu. Please see in our affliction. Now, we'll get philosophical a little bit over here. Doesn't God see everything all the time? What is a request for God to see something? I mean, God is aware of everything. But according to what we said, we can explain it very nicely, that we're asking God now to look at us because there's a change in our situation. When we were guilty of sin, prior to doing tshuva and being forgiven, so there's justification for why we're suffering in exile, why things are not working the way we want. However, once we do tshuva and are forgiven, so we're in a new situation. We're like a new person. And therefore we say, Re'ena ve'onyenu, God, look now in our affliction, because hopefully now we'll merit a different result. Until now, you decreed whatever you decreed, and we were deserving of whatever lack of good or punishment we were receiving. But now in our new state of so-called perfection, through tshuva, through forgiveness, so now look at us anew. And that's what we're really asking over here. Now look at our affliction from this new perspective. Now, here is a very interesting statement, and we have to understand it. It's actually a very deep statement. The Kabbalists explain a lot about the concept of God and His name. I think we've spoken about it in the third blessing when we talk about that God is holy and His name is holy. But we'll readdress it here, because there's going to be a slightly different understanding for it. The question is this: why do we essentially want to say, God, redeem us for your sake, not our sake? It's a very humble request, right? Familiar, and we see it in the first bracha as well. Redeem us, leman shemo. Bring us a goel leman shemo. We also want to put our merits not on us, but on our fathers. Redeem the descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, because they were tzaddikim, so they deserve redemption. Or for your name's sake, again in the first bracha. Here too we mention leman shemecha. Now, if we essentially just want to say for your sake, we don't have to mention His name. But it's specific over here, leman shemecha, for your name's sake, because the result of our exile makes it as a diminishing of God's name in the world. God as an absolute ruler, and God as the God of Israel, is not in His full state of praise and glory, because His people are stepped on, unfortunately, and the people in the world do not obey Him. So the idea of bringing redemption, besides the fact that, of course, our situation will improve, but a truly humble request, a truly selfless request, is not for us and our improved situation. In the bigger picture, what's more important? The little bit that we have to deal with because of our own mistakes and our own transgression, or the fact that the disgrace of Hashem's great name, that's something that we are supposed to be more concerned about if we were able to be selfless the way that tzaddikim are. But anyway, this is hinted to in this expression. to redeem us for your name's sake is because God's name, and really all of the different names we refer to him as, are truly diminished in this time period. For example, there's a discussion in the Gemara about the idea that God is, we call him the great, the mighty, and awesome. Moshe Rabbeinu said this in the Torah. And of course, in that time period, it was clear that God was great, mighty, and awesome because his people were protected by him, and God did miracles, and the world understood and saw that he was great, mighty, and awesome. But eventually, they decided to take this phrase out of the prayers, or we stopped mentioning these praises, because when the Jews are in exile and being abused by the nation, so where is God's greatness? Where is God's might? Where is God's awesomeness? But the later rabbis, the men of the great assembly, came and said, actually, it's not so. The fact that the Jews are surviving in exile is also a testimony to God's being great, mighty, and awesome. Because otherwise, how would one sheep survive among 70 wolves? And so, based on this idea, they restored these praises of Hashem, great, mighty, and awesome, in our text of prayer. However, one should not be fooled and think that this is the ultimate expression of God's greatness, God's might, and God's awesomeness, that we're surviving. No. A greater testimony to that will be when we're back on top in our land with a King Mashiach and with peace, tranquility, and of course, no one able to abuse us or to go against God's laws. That will be the ultimate expression of God's greatness, might, and power and awesomeness. But it's a consolation until now that we still exist, and that's a sign that God is still there with us, protecting us, but it's in a concealed way. And that's not the full greatness of Hashem's name. So we say here, bring us Geula for your name's sake, because when that does happen, so God is our King, God is our provider, and God as the King of the world will be revealed in a much greater, full, complete sense. And the truth is that really the purpose of creation was for God to become known to his creations, namely man, as our King, as our provider. And so it won't be until the redemption where this true inner desire of creation will be fulfilled in its fullest, to its fullest. Now, over here, we say, Kiel, at the end, we say, Kiel Goel Chazak Ata, because you are a mighty Redeemer, strong Redeemer. So it's interesting because really the idea of redeeming us is an act of kindness. However, it requires strength. In what way is God a mighty Redeemer? So there are two ways for God to redeem us from all types of personal trouble and also the global redemption we saw in Egypt. We just finished celebrating Hanukkah. Purim will be coming up. So really, God can show his might. He can be chazak in a way that he shows his might by making miracles and, intimidating us in that way. And that's a real strength, like when a huge, strong person comes, so everybody's afraid of him. Obviously, it's not an exact mashal. God is much more intimidating than it's a strong guy. But God can show us his might and his power, as the expression is. He's mishaded ma'arachot shamayim. He basically can do whatever he wants with the heavenly hosts and with nature. It's like a kid playing with marbles. He can play with the world like a kid plays with marbles. That's the great, awesome power of Hashem, and that's Goel Chazak At. But there's another type of strength also, which is not so apparent, is when God is able to hide himself within nature and also bring about a redemption. Now, this second type of redemption, which is more of a hidden type of, providence of Hashem that leads to our being saved, it's interesting because through the process, we're looking around and asking, where is God? Where is his strength? Why isn't he helping me? But at the end, what happens is at the end when God does save us, so it actually, when you look back, you can see that God was there the whole time, similar to the Purim story, and that's a different way of bringing out God's strength. And that's really seen retroactively in retrospect. And that's another way that God saves us, but the power of the end result is stronger. Instead of seeing this flashy power by making miracles, we are able to, through inner introspection, we're able to see, wow, look at my personal life, look at what I've been through. And when we see a great result at the end, we can reach an understanding that God was there the whole time. And that's a tremendous power of Hashem in a reverse sense, in that he's able to constrict himself, limit himself within nature and still be present and still have his ratzon, still have his will be fulfilled. That's an awesome power of Hashem to do it that way. That's basically some thoughts on this blessing. When you'll be praying this blessing, we do say 3 times a day. So we have we did a lot of talk, but the main 2 points really that we want to emphasize, which is something you could actually think about when you're praying, so to enhance the actual praying, the process of praying, let's just make the 2 points really quick. We say, look at our affliction, and the question is, obviously, God's aware of everything, always. So the answer is that since we've just finished the blessing of tshuva and forgiveness, so it's look now, specifically, that we're in this new state, and therefore we should merit being redeemed, whereas as opposed to before we didn't merit being redeemed. Then we said God's name. Obviously, that's self-understood. God's names are completely diminished now, but in a great way. People laugh at us, mock us. It's terrible. But when we'll be redeemed, so that will all stop, and God's glory will be, of course, to its fullest. This is actually a pasuk which we quote all the time. It says, "Bayom hahu yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad." In the end of days, God's name will be one. God and His name will be one. It'll be a more complete revelation of God's oneness and God's power in the world. That's the second point. And the third point was Goel Chazak. We said that Goel Chazak could mean two things. We could see an overt strength from Hashem, or we could see at the end, in retrospect, this almost deeper strength in that God is able to also control things, but in a hidden way. And that's what the main 3 points we brought out. Okay, Shkach everybody.